Please join me in welcoming Tony Earley.
Thank you. Before we get started, my pals Jill McCorkle and Steve Yarbrough couldn't make it tonight. So on 3, I want y'all to yell, "Hi, Jill. Hi, Steve." Okay? 1, 2, 3. Hi, Jill. Hi, Steve. Y'all were excellent. Thank you. When I started thinking about coming to the conference this year and sort of the milestones that are passing, I did the math and quickly and alarmingly discovered that the first time I came to Sewanee was 25 years ago. And if you consider that, let's just say that my adolescence ended at age 32 when I got married, I've been coming here my entire adult life. I came as a fellow in '94, and then I came back. I was on staff for a couple of years, and then Wyatt invited me to be the Dakin Fellow at the university Advent semester in '97. And when my wife Sarah and I got here, we had zero money. I mean, we had absolutely nothing. And she had just finished a seminary degree, and I'd given up on my career plans as a chronically depressed freelance writer. And we got here, and we were absolutely completely broke. So we got here, we went to Winchester to buy groceries. And while we were in the grocery store, it snowed 4 inches. And I didn't think we were going to be able to make it back up the mountain. We spun all the way up the mountain in first and second gear. But we made it. We made it to the mountain, and we got and rode onto campus. And you know how that's that sort of beautiful sort of lavender light right after it snowed, and it was so absolutely gorgeous, and it was still snowing just a little bit. You know, a lone student walking across the lawn in front of the Gothic buildings, and I thought, things are going to be okay. It's going to work out. And I had a job, and I realized we were going to be able to make it from that January until I started my job at Vanderbilt in the fall. So to this day, whenever I drive them to the mountain, I think things are going to be okay. It's going to work out. So Wyatt somehow sensed my poverty and desperation. When I first started coming here, Wyatt was blonde. He was sort of the Justin Bieber of formalism. I'd say, "Hey, Wyatt, how's it going?" And he'd say, "I swam 6 miles today." "Really, is that so?" "Got a plane, too." "How do you get to Alan Tate's grave?" "That way." "How do you get to the French house?" "De la sorte." Wyatt's given me a lot of advice over the years. He once told me to buy a Saab. So I'd like to thank Wyatt. And like all of my compatriots, I was delighted to be asked to contribute to the issue of the Sewanee Review honoring Wyatt. And this is my piece. It's about Alice McDermott. Alice McDermott and I have taught together at the Writers Conference so many times that we've become the workshop equivalent of an old married couple. We speak in the private code of the long familiar. During class, if she says, "Tell them about that thing," I know what thing she means. When I move my hand half an inch toward her on the tabletop, she knows it's time to move on to the next story. And when she purses her lips and makes a noise, audible only to me, that sounds like the final flight of a disappointed mosquito. I know that I've said something stupid. He goes, I'm talking, I'm gesticulating, I'm making my point, I'm teaching, and she goes, I stop talking, I look at her and I say, what? She says, well, before suggesting in the politest possible terms that what I just said, while not exactly stupid, is perhaps not all that bright. She proposes an alternative. She is never wrong. I look at the class and say, what she said. If every story has an ideal narrative line, a platonic yellow brick road that leads to the one place it is meant to go, the problem for the writer is that a story can go to an infinite number of other places, and the shape of that infinity changes every time the writer chooses a word. Somebody cut your character off in traffic. My thesaurus has 51 words for angry. Pick one. The stars rearrange themselves in the sky. Alice is a genius at peering into that cacophony of possibility and seeing that ideal line. Say an orthopedic salesman from St. Louis named Steve submits a story to workshop about an orthopedic appliance salesman from East St. Louis named Bill. In the story, Bill's company is losing artificial knee market share to a Chinese conglomerate. His wife has begun taking yoga classes. They fight about the pants. He stops at McDonald's to get coffee and remembers the toy train set the two of them put together one Christmas for their now estranged son. Bill resolves to dig the train out of the garage and make it run again. Steve reads a page from his story and looks up expectantly. Alice asks for comments. A woman with plastic fruit on her hat asks, why only knees? Maybe Bill could sell hips too? A guy speculates on what is wrong with the train. The woman from New York wonders if it's racist that the knees putting Bill out of business were made in China. Alice taps the manuscript with a fingernail. Knees, she says. Titanium, not titanium, American, Chinese. Who cares? It doesn't matter. Bill could be selling dynamite to coyotes. What's the story? I have no idea what she's talking about, only that she has begun speaking in italics. I help her stare down the room. Nobody answers. What about the clairvoyant sword swallower? Alice asks. Clairvoyant sword swallower? I look down at my manuscript. What clairvoyant sword swallower? Page 11, Alice says. Sure enough, page 11, halfway down, a clairvoyant sword swallower materializes in a haze of coffee steam. She reads palms in a storefront in a dingy strip mall across the highway from McDonald's. Every morning, she watches the same sad guy drinking coffee. Because she's clairvoyant, she knows about the knees and the wife and the yoga and the pants and the train. She knows that today Bill will drive over and ask, whatever happened to the model train store that used to be here? She'll pretend to read his palm, say something generic. She already knows that the Chinese knees will cost him his job, that his wife will pack up her yoga pants and move out, that she gave the toy train to Goodwill when their son went away to college. He will stare at the swords hanging on the wall, but is too shy to ask. Alice leans forward. The sword-swallowing clairvoyant will know all this, she says. But guess what? She won't tell him a thing. And that, she says, is the story. Everyone in the class is scribbling furiously. Underlining. Steve is about to weep with joy. Oh, thank you, Alice, he says. Thank you so much. Turns out his grandmother was a clairvoyant sword swallower. Sword swallowing is how she saved enough money to sneak her children out of the old country. Clairvoyance is how they made it through the minefield and the wire and the searchlights and over the wall. In America, she worked the boardwalk 7 days a week, sent everybody to college, died before Steve was born, swallowed one sword too many. She knew it was coming. Steve says, I never really wanted to write about artificial knees, but I thought knees were all I knew. But now, he says, he takes a minute to compose himself. Now I know the story. I'm still staring at my manuscript, wondering how the hell I missed a clairvoyant sword swallower. Alice turns to me and smiles, asks, do you want to add anything? I smile back. Right now, I'm the luckiest man on the mountain. I'm sitting at a table with Alice McDermott. Nope, I say, we're good. I've had a slight change of plan. I was going to read from the story that I failed to finish in time for this reading. And instead, I'm going to read from the story that I'm working on and I'm really excited about, which is the same story. It's just how I tricked myself out of despair. This is from that. It's not all of that. It's called Place of Safety. For years, people asked Rochelle, what were you thinking? Everybody wanted to know. Strangers would cross the street to cut her off on the sidewalk. Hey, they would say, tell me one thing. She put the girls down after lunch and tried to catch a nap herself, but every time she started to doze off, the sirens. You'd think they'd blow the sirens only after somebody had actually seen a tornado, but no. They'd been going off all morning. She didn't know how the girls slept through it. They were almost out of milk. They only had enough for 1 cup and both girls would want it. The IGA was only 3 blocks away. You could almost see it from the house. There and back, 5 minutes flat, 10 tops if somebody in line had a cart full. The girls were sleeping so peacefully. She locked the door and shook the handle and stuck her fingers in her ears and ran for the car. It was tornado weather. Too hot, too humid, too still, the air singed with ozone, low black clouds boiling by, a movie running too fast, but not a breath of air stirring on the ground. Street lights on at lunchtime. But it was Alabama in April. When was it not tornado weather? At the IGA, the parking lot was empty. Mr. Chandaluri was holding the door open. Rochelle pulled her fingers out of her ears and yanked the chain on her brightest smile. Her mama always said, smile whenever somebody does something nice for you, then they'll want to do it again. But the sirens, the wailing chopped through her head and circled away and circled back and chopped through her head again. It was hard to keep looking pleasant. Come inside, he said. She said, why, thank you, Mr. Chandaluri. In, he said, now. That's when she saw the keys hanging from the door. She stopped. Why was Mr. Chandaluri trying to lock her inside the IGA? She said, we ran out of milk. He said, look, and pointed across the parking lot. A hive of queasy green cloud hunkered over downtown. As they watched, a crooked finger of smoke wobbled to the ground beneath it and began to scratch among the buildings. A flock of shingles flushed from the roof of the insurance office and spun away into the air. A telephone pole leaned slowly forward, an old man picking up a penny off the floor, the wires pulling tight before toppling over with a white flash and a boom. The lights in the IGA went off, the street lights, the sirens. Mr. Chandaluri grabbed her by the wrist and pulled her into the store. Run, he said, aisle 1, straight back, the freezer. She heard keys jangling, the thunk of the door lock, her flip-flops slapping the floor, a glow, a window, a door, a broom handle slice of light across the tar-black room, the freezer, the cold, Mrs. Chandaluri squatting on the floor with a flashlight. Anil? She asked. He's right behind me, Rochelle said. And then Mr. Chandaluri was kneeling beside Mrs. Chandaluri. Oh, Mother, he said, it's coming. Mrs. Chandaluri pointed the flashlight at Rochelle. Mrs. Taggart, she said, Where are your babies? Tina woke up first. She had waited until Tanya was asleep, then tiptoed out of the room and ran down the hall and climbed into bed with their mother. Rochelle said, "You can stay here as long as your sister doesn't wake up." Tina thought, "Don't wake up," and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, Rochelle was gone. She wandered down the hall to the kitchen and around the island into the living room. She circled the coffee table and went back through the kitchen and opened the basement door a crack to see if the light was on downstairs and pushed it closed again. She peeked inside the bathroom. She looked behind the shower curtain. She went back to Rochelle's room and checked the closet and under the bed. When she poked Tanya on the shoulder, Tanya frowned without opening her eyes and said, "Don't wake me up." Tina said, "Mommy's not here." They searched Rochelle's bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. Tanya cracked open the basement door and closed it again. In the living room, they looked out the picture window. The street lights were on. Tanya said, "Her car's gone." "Where did she go?" Tina asked. Dogs all over town were howling along with the sirens. Tanya said, "We should turn on the TV." They sat down on the rug and Tanya aimed the remote at the television. Bill Beechwood pointed at them and said, "Dana, Alabama, if you can see me, if you can hear the sound of my voice, you should already be in your place of safety. If you have a basement, get in it right now. Run. Kitchen, leave the basement door open so you can see down the rickety stairs, dark and dirt and fabric softener." Tanya jumped and finally snagged the light cord. Tina spun and around beneath the bulb because what were they supposed to do in the basement? Tanya pointed at the narrow space between the washer and dryer and said, "Let's hide in there." Tina said, "I don't want to hide in there." Good spiders and bad spiders lived in the basement, and she couldn't tell them apart. Both kinds definitely lived under the washer and dryer. Tanya said, "It's a tornado." Tina wasn't sure what a tornado was, but she thought it had something to do with the train. She said, "I want Mommy." Tanya sat down and grabbed Tina's arm and tugged her to the floor. Tina said, "Stop." Tanya scooted back into the gap and said, "We have to get in." Tina said, "No," but scooted backward until she bumped up against Tanya's feet. She said, "I'm telling." The light went out. A ghost floated down the street and turned into a lion that jumped on the roof of the house and roared and clawed at the shingles and broke out the windows. It picked up the house and looked underneath it and sucked in a breath and roared so loudly that Tina felt her hair lifting away from her head. She saw daylight, mud flying. Tanya screamed in her ear. She thought, "Put it back down," and covered her head with her arms. And they asked Rochelle, "What did it sound like?" Well, not like a train, not like everybody says. More like jets flying over the stadium at the end of the national anthem and gravel pouring into a truck bed and a car wash vacuum cleaner sucking up paper clips and tennis shoes bungling around the dryer. Then it got so quiet, she could hear Mr. Chandeluri's nose whistling. He said, "Mother, I think it's gone by." Mrs. Chandeluri said, "Mrs. Taggart?" Rochelle said, "They were asleep." Mrs. Chandeluri said, "Anil, open the door." She stood beside her car with her keys in her hand and watched Mr. Chandeluri run down the street and duck under a sagging power line and wade into the canopy of a fallen tree and disappear. Mrs. Chandeluri said, "Run, Mrs. Taggart," and pulled her sari halfway up her calves and jogged after Mr. Chandeluri. Her house was a trash heap, a burn pile, garbage slung into a ditch by rednecks too lazy to drive to the dumpsters in town. Scraps of wood and siding and shingles and clots of pink insulation, magazines and sofa cushions and yellow plastic plates, the Goodwill treadmill, the cooler, the shower curtain, a grocery bag stuffed with other grocery bags, everything she owned. Mr. Chandeluri had managed to climb on top of the pile where the kitchen used to be. He stood with one foot on a piece of the roof and the other on top of the refrigerator. He clasped his hand to his forehead, a sad explorer who had climbed the wrong mountain, then leaned over and closed the freezer door. Oh, no, no, no. Mrs. Chandaluri was down on her hands and knees near the front steps, speaking into a foundation vent. "Little girls," she called, "little girls, are you there?" They stopped crying when they heard Mrs. Chandaluri. One day in line at the IGA, Tanya had picked up a Twix from the candy display and showed it to Tina. Mrs. Chandaluri saw her and said something very fast to Mr. Chandaluri that sounded like words and not like words. Like rain on the car roof, popcorn popping, marbles spilling. They were amazed. Mr. Chandaluri said, "Would you like to have that?" Rochelle turned around and said, "Tanya, put it back." Mrs. Chandaluri said something else to Mr. Chandaluri. He looked down at Tina and smiled. "And how about you? Would you like a Twix too?" he asked. Rochelle said, "Thank you so much, Mr. Chandaluri, but we can pay for it." "Next time," Mr. Chandaluri said. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Rochelle said, "What do you say, girls?" After they got in the car, Tanya asked, "What did Mrs. Chandaluri say to Mr. Chandaluri?" "You made her very angry. She said little girls in the checkout line should keep their hands to themselves." Underneath the house, Tanya whispered, "It's Mrs. Chandaluri." "Where's Mommy?" Tina whispered back. "Hello?" Mrs. Chandaluri said. It sounded like she was right on top of them. "Don't say anything," Tanya said. Tina said, "I want to get out." "Little girls, is that you?" Somewhere outside, Rochelle began to scream, "Tanya, Tanya Taggart, can you hear me?" Tina drew in her breath and closed her eyes and yelled "Mommy" so loudly it made her ears unstop. "They are here," Mrs. Chandaluri shouted. "Mrs. Taggart, your babies are here. Anil, get down from there before you break your neck and be useful and go find help. The children are under the house." Starting in middle school, they played a game Tanya invented called "You're the One." Tanya might say, "You're the tall one," and Tina would answer, "You're the short one," which was true. Easy enough. Tanya might say, "You're the brunette one," and Tina would say, "You're the blonde one," which was also true, although annoying to have to acknowledge because Tanya was vain about her hair. It never ended well. Tanya never knew when to stop, and Tina was too competitive to give up. If Tanya said, "You're the smart one," Tina knew she was supposed to say, "No, you're the smart one," but refused to because it wasn't true. Not by a long shot. And if Tanya took it too far, which she always did, and said, "You're the one God wanted to live," Tina sounded like a loser no matter how she answered. "You're the one" was like tic-tac-toe. Unless you went first, the best you could hope for was a tie. After they got older, Tina knew for a fact from friends who had brothers or sisters in Tanya's grade that Tanya regularly bragged about saving Tina's life. Poor little 4-year-old Tina, who hadn't known what a tornado was. So if Tina made an A, she owed it to Tanya. If she hit 2 home runs in the playoffs against Gunnersville, she owed it to Tanya. Sure, it was Tanya who turned on the television, but Bill Beechwood who told them to go to the basement. It was Tanya who thought to hide between the washer and dryer, but, and this was the important part, and the part nobody ever thought about, it was Tina who had woken her up. If I don't wake up, you don't wake up. You saved me, but I saved you first. I'm the one, not you, not Bill Beechwood. After 2 years of trying, he had finally talked the station into getting Doppler radar. 2 other stations in town had it. Huntsville had it. Montgomery was getting it. Opelika was dreaming about it. It was time. That was in January. February was quiet, just wet, just February. Not much shaking in March either. A couple of middling cold fronts pushing squall lines, moderate straight line winds, the usual suspects. A few watches, but no big deal. Too much sheer aloft for anything substantive to get properly organized. A lot to look at, in other words, but not much to see. Bill, you still got that grease pencil? Then came the 9th of April. That morning, a handful of LP storm cells fired up along the dry line in Mississippi and moved northeast but didn't amount to much. A lot of lightning, a lot of noise, no big deal. So what? Welcome to the Southland in the springtime. Except for the Dana storm. Around 2 o'clock, that one grew a hook echo off the southwestern quadrant. Classic tornado signature. The quotation mark, the apostrophe, the seahorse, rare in Alabama, the first one he'd ever seen live. Would you just look at that? Bill, the Weather Service just warned it. Clear the set, everybody. Sorry, Bill Dance, we're cutting in, going live in 3, 2, 1. Worth every penny. Doppler saved lives, folks. That's the bottom line. End of story. Once, when they were in high school, who knows what they had been fighting about? You used my hairbrush. No, I didn't, Mom. Make her get off the phone. Tanya slammed her door in Tina's face. Tina found herself staring at the picture of Bill Beechwood her sister kept taped to the door. To my old friend Tanya on her sweet 16th, may you always dwell in a place of safety. God bless, Bill. Place of safety. God bless, Bill. He never sent her a picture. She took off one of her Chuck Taylors and threw it at his face as hard as she could. Behind the door, Tanya yelled, Mom! Rochelle yelled from the kitchen, Tina Rose Taggart, you better not be throwing shoes. Tina kicked the door and yelled, I should have let you sleep. Well, you were paying attention. Outside, they heard sirens whooping and chainsaws gnawing and big trucks beeping and men yelling, come on back, ho, ho, ho. They heard footsteps running and keys jangling and leather creaking and radios squawking out their address. They heard Chief Kenny say, Larry, get down off of there. You want to make the whole thing fall in? I don't want nobody moving nothing until we figure out what we got. I'm serious, Wayne. Stop pulling on that. Rochelle hadn't been able to stop crying, which had made them start crying all over again. She was the worst mother in the world. They were almost out of milk. She was only going to the IGA. She would never have left them in a million years. She had known a tornado was coming. They were sleeping so peacefully. She was so sorry. Could they ever forgive Mommy? Chief Kenny said, Rochelle, hop up a sec, hon. Let me get down there and talk to these girls. Tina heard Chief Kenny's knees pop. He said, Miss Tanya, you down there? Rochelle said, Girls, talk to Chief Kenny. Mommy's right here. Tanya said, Yes, sir. Have you read the lesson for tomorrow yet? Mrs. Chief Kenny taught the primary class at Sunday school. Tanya had just moved up. She said, No, sir. I don't think Mrs. Chief Kenny has either. Jim, turn that thing down. Walk up there and tell him if he's got a question to come down here and ask it. I can see him talking from here. Miss Tanya, I'm shining a light. Can you see the light? No, sir. Is it night? No, ma'am, it is not. It's turned into a real pretty afternoon. Sun shining. Miss Tina, you down there too? Tanya said, She's afraid. I bet she is. I know I would be. Do you like Twix, Miss Tina? Mrs. Chandeluri says you like Twix. Tanya said, We like Twix. Miss Tina, I need to hear you say something. I need to make sure you're not hurt. She's not hurt. Miss Tanya, honey, let Miss Tina talk. Miss Tina, how old are you? Tina said, I want Mommy. Fair enough, Chief Kenny said. His knees popped again. He said, Rochelle, here, draw me a floor plan on the back of this. I need to find worm. Tanya Taggart, you know what I like to do when the weather gets bad? I like to go out in the yard and listen to the sirens and see if I can see a tornado. Not me. I stay inside and turn on the Watch 2, Watch You Weather Center. And if I hear there's a tornado coming, I like to get in my car and drive toward the darkest cloud I can find. I like to snarl up the traffic and cause accidents and get in the way of all the first responders. Not me. I go to my place of safety. What's that? A place of safety is a basement or an interior room, like a bathroom or a closet. I try to stay away from windows and put as many walls as possible between me and the storm. Wow, you must be very smart. I'm not just smart, I'm watch you weather-wise. Hey, that ice cream looks pretty good. Can I have some? Get your own, Bill. Get your own. Chief Kenny turned a giant worm loose underneath the house. Tina could hear it talk to itself as it crawled toward them. Okay, there's a nail, and that's a nail, and damn, that's a lot of nails. Is that loose? Nope. Then put that arm through there, and that leg there, and my foot's stuck. Nope, not stuck. Is that a spider? Not a spider. I don't know what that is. Could have been a spider. She was going to scream as soon as she saw it. And something's wet. I don't want to know what that is. I know what that is. And it's nasty. Will that move? Yep, that moves. Don't move that. And toaster and somebody's coat and whoa, stove in the staircase. Please don't follow me, stove. And there's the wash machine. Chief Kenny, I'm almost there. Chief Kenny said, Worm, turn that thing off. I'm about 6 feet away from where you are. She opened her mouth and drew in a deep breath. When Dr. Koppelman ducked under the caution tape, nobody stopped him. Rochelle was the receptionist in the radiology department at Dana Memorial, and he was the radiologist. He was her boss. Why didn't somebody stop him? She didn't want him to see her house like this, and she didn't want him to see her like this. Sweatpants and a ratty Alabama t-shirt that had belonged to Tommy Taggart. She was covered in mud and her hair was dirty and she didn't have on makeup and the girls had painted her toenails 2 different colors because they couldn't agree on one and she wasn't wearing a bra. She was the worst mother in the world and she didn't want him to know that. She had left her children alone while they were asleep and a tornado had come and destroyed their house and they were trapped underneath it and somebody named Worm was trying to find them while she watched Chief Kenny talk to them through a hole. Dr. Koppelman didn't move to hug her, which was good, because half the town was on the other side of the caution tape watching, and the other half was in the volunteer fire department on this side of the tape, also watching. Rochelle, he said. Oh, Rochelle, I am so sorry. She said, thank you for coming, Dr. Koppelman, like this was a party. Of course, he said, of course. He often said everything twice, a tick they sometimes made fun of in the office. Where's Dr. Koppelman gone? Lunch. When will he be back? 1-1. I came when I heard about the girls. If she had spoken at that moment, she would have burst into tears again, so she nodded. Please don't be nice to me right now. Are they injured? She shook her head. Good, he said, good. As a boss, she liked Dr. Koppelman well enough. He could be a little passive-aggressive, but unlike all the other men bosses she had had, he was never aggressive. He might slap a misfiled film down on the counter a little harder than was absolutely necessary, but he would never say anything to you about misfiling it. He would never make you feel bad in front of anybody else. He said, can I call anyone for you? I know your family lives in North Carolina. Have they been notified? I called Mama. What about your husband? Would you like me to contact your husband? Rochelle shook her head again. What to say about Tommy Taggart? He was shacked up with some Cajun whore in Bayou Gula. He had parked her and Dana and said they wouldn't be there long. He made good money working offshore, but had stopped sending any of it home. He had left her before Tina could walk. The church rented her the poorhouse month to month. She knew that's what people called it. Her mother in North Carolina had a new husband who didn't like kids, so here she was. Chief Kenny's radio said, Chief Kenny, I'm almost there. Chief Kenny said, Worm, turn that thing off. I'm about 6 feet away from where you are. Tina squealed so loudly that Chief Kenny jerked away from the foundation vent and reflexively reached down to turn down the volume on his radio, even though his radio wasn't on. The worm had one big blue eye so bright it blinded her to look at it. It said, oh, I'm sorry. Then the eye moved away from her face and lit up her feet, and she saw that the worm was a man wearing a light around his head, which he took off and dangled toward her like a mouse he was holding by the tail. See, he said, see? Tanya smacked her on top of the head and said, stop. Tina stopped squealing and said, ow. Rochelle said, Tina, what is it, baby? What's wrong? The man said, she's okay. I just scared her with my light. He was wearing fat gloves and a fireman's coat, and the yellow stripes on the coat flashed when the bouncing light hit them. A drop of sweat rolled to the end of his nose and jumped off. He said, girls, I am so sorry. I wouldn't scare you like that for the world. Tanya said, she thought you were a worm. Well, the man said, I've heard that before. We could hear you crawling. Rochelle said, Tina, honey, Mr. Worm isn't a worm. That's just his name. Donnie, Worm said. Donald, Worm, whatever. I like Donald. Chief Kenny said, Worm, those girls okay? Yes, sir. They're looking out at me like a couple of little owls, and they do not appear to be injured. So what do we got? Let's see. I'm in kind of a little lean-to crawl space made by a big hunk of floor deck, and it looks like a lot of the roof is balanced on a joist laying on top of the washer and dryer. I don't like the way any of it looks, to be honest. You think we can lift it? 10-10. I'd be afraid to try that. You think you can get a jack under that joist? Maybe. One of the little girls would have to crawl out here where I am, and I don't think there's room. What about the stairway? That's where the stove is, and I don't think we ought to mess with it. Can you crawl them out? 10-10, glass and nails everywhere. Well, Worm, dadgummit. Crawl back out here and draw me a picture. On my way. Oh, girls, he said, I almost forgot. I brought you some presents. Let's see if I can reach back in this pocket. Here's a little flashlight for you to hold. And here's a little flashlight for you to hold. And what's in the other pocket? Why, here's a Twix for you, and here's a Twix for you. Mrs. Chandaluri said to make sure I gave you these. Chief Kenny decided to dig a trench perpendicular to the house and cut a hole through the basement wall with a masonry saw to get the girls out that way. He said, Wayne, go round up Flea Harden and tell him to get over here with his digger. The cat? No, the little one. The Kubota. We could probably get Stovepipe out here sooner. It's Saturday. He's probably down at his mama's house. He just bought that little Komatsu. Yeah, and Stovepipe's like as not to knock the wall down, too. Go find Flea and tell him I said to saddle up. While they were waiting for Flea Harden to get there with his digger, Dr. Koppelman pulled Rochelle aside and turned his back to the caution tape and handed her a set of keys. These are for the lake house, he said. She quickly lowered her hand to her side and said, Dr. Koppelman, he said, you and the girls need a place to stay, and I hardly ever used the place since, well, Mimi, breast cancer, and her husband a radiologist. Dr. Koppelman, you're very kind, but I couldn't possibly. She tried to hand the keys back, but he put his hands in his back pockets. He said, No, I insist, just until you find a place. You know which house it is, right? It was the house where once a year Dr. Koppelman held the awkward cookout. Everybody wore bathing suits under their clothes, but nobody ever swam. The office manager and all the techs side-eyed Rochelle, afraid that she was going to strip down to her bathing suit, while all the husbands watched her more openly, hoping that she would. Dr. Koppelman scurried around, asking if anyone wanted another beer, which everybody did, but nobody was about to take. They gnawed on the hamburgers he had grilled well beyond done. And tried to avoid looking at his legs, which, although hairless and supernaturally white, had surprisingly large calf muscles. She nodded. Are you sure? Sometimes people asked Rochelle questions that only pretended to be questions. They said things like, well, that tornado turned out to be quite a blessing, didn't it? What are you supposed to say to that? If she said, it's never a good thing to have your house destroyed by a tornado while your children are inside, they would say, but you wound up with 2 houses, though, didn't you? To be honest, she had driven away from 3 awkward cookouts wishing that she lived in Dr. Koppelman's lake house. It was the kind of house you love so much in a dream you wake up wondering if it's real and how you can find it. It had poplar paneled walls and beat up hardwood floors with cow paths worn through the varnish and that mildewy old book smell you want a lake house to have. It had lumpy, mismatched furniture in bad plaids and out-of-date colors that would look tacky anywhere else. There wasn't a right angle in the place. If you spilled beer in the kitchen, it would run underneath the refrigerator before you could wipe it up. If you didn't jiggle the handle, the toilet would run all night. The paint was peeling and the roof was rusty and the screens were rusty and the moss was growing on the chimney and the windows rattled when the wind blew. It was perfect. And somehow she had the key. 4 carloads of hospital housekeeping staff were leaving just when they got there, including fat old Bill Bright, the head housekeeper himself, a man whom Rochelle nor anyone else at Dana General had ever seen strike a lick of work. A day filled with miracles. The house was spotless. Gleaming toilets, dusted ceiling fans, vacuumed cushions, dishwasher running, brand new shelf paper, beds made and toilets laid out, hospital corners. The cabinets were filled with food. On the counter, in a sealed envelope with Rochelle's name typed on the front, was a Walmart gift certificate for $500. 2 gallons of milk in the fridge. Thank you.